What happens when the most powerful man in the room, the one who has built an empire on control, contracts, and cold precision suddenly finds himself undone by the very person he thought was just a background figure? Jonathan Pierce was a millionaire CEO, feared and admired in equal measure. Emily Warren was his assistant, sharp-tongued, a little messy, and far too ordinary in a world of sharp suits and polished glass. Their roles were clear, their boundaries unshakable, or so they thought. But one unexpected business trip changed everything. From the quiet intimacy of late-night work sessions to a chance encounter by the pool at dawn, the lines between power and vulnerability, duty and desire, began to blur. Could Jonathan, a man raised to believe feelings were weakness, allow himself to care? And could Emily, who had fought her whole life for dignity and independence, risk becoming a rumor, a headline, a story whispered in the hallways? This is not just a tale of love. It is a story of pride, fear, courage, and what it truly costs to be human. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything. Now, let's begin. Jonathan Pierce was the kind of man people lowered their voices around, even when he wasn't in the room. At 42, the millionaire CEO of Pierce Global Industries carried himself with the steady weight of someone who had long ago decided emotions were a luxury. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and walked with a stillness that made people notice him before they even realized why. His dark suits were always pressed to perfection. His words, when he chose to speak, landed with the finality of signed contracts. In the glossy office tower of Midtown Manhattan, his presence was like gravity. Assistants straightened their backs when they sensed him step onto the floor. Junior managers rehearsed entire sentences before daring to knock on his door. The board trusted him because he had built their company into an empire. The staff feared him because he never laughed at their jokes and never tolerated mistakes. Jonathan had rules. He lived by them, and he expected everyone else to live by them, too. Rule 1, never mix business with personal feelings. Rule 2, efficiency over pleasantries. Rule 3, the company always came first. These rules had made him wealthy, respected, and, if he was honest, very much alone. Enter Emily Warren. Emily was 32, and if you asked anyone at Pierce Global, she was the only person who could keep up with Jonathan. She wasn't glamorous the way many imagined a CEO's assistant might be. She didn't stride into the office in designer heels or perfect hair. Most mornings, she rushed in with a coffee cup in one hand, her laptop bag slipping from her shoulder, and her glasses sliding down her nose. She was known for her habit of scribbling notes on sticky pads that ended up plastered everywhere: her desk, her phone, sometimes even the edge of Jonathan's computer screen. Yet, somehow, she managed the impossible. 3 phone calls at once, a scheduling crisis, and a spilled latte. Emily could juggle them all without breaking stride. She anticipated Jonathan's moods better than he did. She reminded him of birthdays on the board. She once stopped him from walking into a meeting with 2 different shoes after he had stayed up 3 nights in a row on a deal. No one else dared to tell him when he was wrong. Emily did often, and with a crooked smile that made people wonder why she still had her job. The truth was, Jonathan trusted her. He would never admit it aloud, but he knew it. She was his safeguard. The one person in the entire building who treated him like a man rather than a machine. Still, there were boundaries. They both knew them. Jonathan's office door was glass, but it might as well have been a fortress. Emily walked in without knocking anyway. "You've got 5 minutes before your 9 o'clock with the investors," she would announce, tossing a folder onto his desk. He would glance up, cool and composed. "I'll stick with efficient and intimidating, thank you." And she would quip back, "Just don't be surprised if the investors prefer the guy who smiles." It was their rhythm, sharp and quick, never soft. The staff whispered about it, speculated endlessly. But both Jonathan and Emily drew the line clearly. Professional, sharp, platonic, yet beneath that steady surface, something unspoken lived. Jonathan sometimes caught himself watching her when she pushed her hair back or laughed too loudly at her own jokes. Emily sometimes noticed how his eyes softened, just barely, when he allowed himself a private smile. Both ignored it. Both pretended not to notice. Jonathan told himself he was content. His world was measured in stock prices, contracts, and headlines. Emily told herself she was fine with the role she played, tucked safely within boundaries that allowed banter but nothing more. But life rarely respects rules, and all it would take was one unexpected assignment, one trip neither of them had planned for, to tilt the balance they had guarded so carefully. The storm of change had not yet arrived, but the air in Pierce Global already carried attention, the kind that hums low in the background before thunder cracks open the sky. Jonathan straightened his tie, unaware that within a week he would question every rule he had built his life upon. Emily scribbled notes in her planner, not knowing her world was about to be rewritten. Their story was waiting, just around the corner. The morning light streamed through the glass walls of Pierce Global's top floor, painting Jonathan Pierce's office in a cold, steady glow. His desk was immaculate as always, every file squared, every pen line perfectly parallel. Jonathan sat behind it, posture straight, tie perfectly knotted, eyes fixed on his laptop screen. Emily Warren tapped briskly across the open floor, clutching her notepad and a half-empty mug of coffee. She didn't bother to knock. She never did. "You rang," she said, pushing the door open with her shoulder. Jonathan didn't look up immediately. He finished typing a line, hit send, and then closed the laptop with quiet precision. "Yes. Sit down." "Emily." Her brows lifted. That tone measured, commanding usually meant trouble. She sat, notebook balanced on her lap, pen poised. "What's on fire now?" "You're coming with me to Seattle," Jonathan said flatly. Emily blinked. Seattle. He leaned back in his chair, as if the decision were already carved in stone. "We're meeting with the Harrington Group. The West Bay infrastructure project is on the line. I'll need you there." For a moment, Emily simply stared at him. "Jonathan," she said slowly, "I'm your assistant. I schedule your meetings. I run interference when two board members want the same hour. I don't do trips." His expression didn't change. "You've managed every detail of this project. You know it better than anyone. I need you in the room." Emily let out a short laugh. "Oh, no, you need a travel companion. That's what this sounds like. And let me remind you, I don't exactly scream first-class jet-setter." She gestured at her pencil skirt with a faint coffee stain. "I'm more bring your own granola bar." Jonathan's mouth quirked, not quite a smile, more an acknowledgement. "Emily, this isn't optional." The room seemed to tighten around her. She folded her arms, leaning back in the chair. "Not optional. You're telling me that, after 4 years of being perfectly fine running this circus from New York, suddenly you can't function without me on the road." His voice dropped lower, firmer. "This meeting isn't routine. The Harringtons have a reputation for testing boundaries, for trying to rattle the people they do business with. You balance me out. You remind me when my edge turns into a wall. That's why you're coming." Emily blinked again. That might have been the closest thing to a compliment she had ever heard from him, but she wasn't about to admit it. "So now I'm your emotional translator," she teased, though her voice carried an edge. Jonathan didn't flinch, if you prefer that term. The point is the same. Silence stretched between them. Emily looked down at her notebook, then back up at him. His face was carved from stone, calm, resolute, immovable. She felt her pulse quicken. Inside, a storm was already brewing. Part of her bristled. She had worked hard to build respect in this company, to be seen as more than the girl with glasses who keeps Pierce's calendar. If she went on this trip, she risked becoming something else in people's eyes, fodder for rumors, whispers in hallways. But another part of her, a quieter, stubborn part, felt something she didn't want to name. A flicker of curiosity. A question she couldn't quite silence. What would it be like to see Jonathan outside of this glass fortress? Emily sighed, setting her pen down. "And what exactly do you expect from me on this grand Seattle adventure? Hand you files. Keep your tie straight, or maybe just smile reassuringly at the Harringtons when you glare too hard." His eyes held hers. "I expect you to do what you always do. Make sure I don't lose sight of the bigger picture." Something shifted in her chest at the way he said it. For all his rigid formality, there was weight in his words, a trace of reliance he rarely admitted. Emily shook her head, trying to dislodge the thought. "Fine. But if I end up jet-lagged, I expect hazard pay." Jonathan allowed the faintest hint of amusement to touch his eyes. "Duly noted." She rose, scribbling a note on her pad. "Seattle." She muttered. "West Bay, Harrington Group, and, apparently, babysitting you." She glanced back at him with a crooked smile. "You owe me, Pierce." Jonathan didn't answer, but his gaze lingered on her just a moment longer than usual, following her out the door. Left alone, Emily walked back across the buzzing office floor, her heart caught in a tug of war. Pride pulled her one way, responsibility another, and beneath it all, a nagging thought whispered at the edge of her mind. Maybe, just maybe, this trip would test more than Jonathan's business tactics. The terminal at JFK buzzed with the kind of energy only an early morning flight could bring, families wrangling strollers, business travelers power walking with phones pressed to their ears, announcements echoing about boarding gates and security checks. Jonathan Pierce cut through the crowd like a knife. His navy suit was pressed without a wrinkle, his leather briefcase in hand, his stride steady and precise. He didn't dodge people, they moved for him. Emily Warren, trailing behind, was another story entirely. She juggled a carry-on bag, a laptop case slung across her shoulder, and a large coffee she refused to part with. Her hair had slipped free from its bun, strands falling across her face as she hurried to keep up. "Jonathan," she called, dodging a group of tourists. "Do you ever walk like a normal human being, or is this some kind of Olympic event I didn't sign up for?" "Without slowing," he replied. "If you're late, it's not my responsibility to adjust my pace." Emily huffed, nearly spilling her coffee as she jogged a step to catch him. "For the record, I wasn't late. You were early. There's a difference." Jonathan gave her the briefest glance, one brow lifting. Early is on time is late. She rolled her eyes so hard she nearly tripped over her own bag. Spoken like a man who's never sprinted across a terminal with a cup of cheap coffee and dignity hanging by a thread. As if on cue, her cup tilted dangerously, a splash of latte hitting the lid. She managed to steady it, muttering, "See, this is real-life athletics." Jonathan said nothing, but the corner of his mouth twitched so slight it was almost imperceptible. When they reached the gate, the attendant scanned Jonathan's boarding pass with a polished smile, her eyes lingering on him just a fraction longer than necessary. Her voice softened as she said, "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Pierce." Emily caught the look and smirked. Well, somebody's impressed. Should I step aside so she can board with you? Maybe she can carry your briefcase too." Jonathan ignored her, though his jaw tightened slightly. He handed over her pass as well, with the kind of practiced efficiency that dismissed the attendant's interest without a word. As they walked down the jet bridge, Emily leaned closer. "You know, if I had $1 for every time someone gave you the tall, dark, and terrifying look, I could probably retire." "Good," he said evenly. "Then you wouldn't have to complain about your job anymore." Her laughter rang down the narrow corridor, warm and unbothered. People turned to glance at her, but she didn't care. That was Emily, unafraid to poke fun at the very man who could fire her with a single word. Inside, Jonathan found himself unsettled. He should have brushed off her teasing as he always did. But the truth was, he noticed things, small things that he didn't want to admit. The way she clung stubbornly to her coffee cup, as if it were armor against the world. The way her humor seemed to make chaos lighter, turning what could have been a hassle into something bearable. Jonathan had spent years surrounding himself with precision schedules, suits, strategy, and yet here she was, all smudged notes and coffee stains, somehow making the disorder look human. He straightened his tie, pushing the thought away. He had built his empire on discipline, not distractions. Still, as they entered the cabin and found their seats, the faintest smile ghosted across his lips. One Emily, busy adjusting her glasses, didn't see. Emily stopped short the moment she stepped into the cabin. Plush leather seats stretched out in neat rows, each one wide enough to sleep on. Overhead compartments weren't crammed with bulging roller bags, but half empty. Waiting, champagne already glimmered in tall glasses. The air smelled faintly of citrus and leather polish. Her jaw actually dropped. This isn't economy. This isn't even premium economy. Jonathan, this is first class, Jonathan said calmly, sliding his briefcase into the bin above his seat. Where else would we be? Emily eased into the seat beside him, running her hand along the armrest like it was some rare artifact. I feel like a raccoon that accidentally wandered into a jewelry store. Jonathan adjusted his cufflink. Unbothered. You'll survive. She glanced at the menu tucked neatly by the armrest and blinked. Wait, there are multiple forks. For breakfast. Who needs 3 forks before noon? Jonathan reached for his water, utterly composed. Those are for the different courses. Her laugh bubbled out, quick and incredulous. Courses. Jonathan. Back home, I ate cereal out of a chipped bowl with a plastic spoon. If I had tried to use 3 forks, my mother would have thought I'd lost my mind. For a moment, he almost smiled. He tried to mask it, but the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth betrayed him. Emily caught it instantly. Oh no, she teased. Was that a smile? Did I just witness the elusive Pierce expression that proves you're not secretly a robot? He cleared his throat, straightening in his seat. Don't get used to it. The attendant arrived with menus and polite efficiency. Emily studied hers like it was written in a foreign language. Jonathan, what's smoked trout frittata with fennel salad? Should I be embarrassed? I don't know what half these words mean. You'll like the pancakes, he said without hesitation. Her eyes narrowed playfully. Are you recommending breakfast foods to me now? Next thing you'll be telling me how to butter my toast properly. You'd be surprised how many people get it wrong. He deadpanned. She shook her head, chuckling as she ordered the pancakes. He chose the omelet without hesitation. When the food arrived, Emily stared at her plate. Perfectly stacked pancakes, fresh berries gleaming like jewels, syrup served in a silver pitcher. She picked up her fork, then whispered, If I drop syrup on this pristine tablecloth, will they throw me out? Jonathan glanced sideways at her. They might throw me out for bringing you. Her laughter spilled into the quiet cabin, and several passengers glanced their way. She didn't notice, but Jonathan did, and for the first time in years, he didn't mind being noticed. As the flight settled into its rhythm, Emily pulled out her laptop, typing notes for the upcoming meeting. Jonathan reviewed documents on his tablet. The space between them was filled with the hum of engines and the quiet shuffle of papers. Then, turbulence hit. The plane jolted suddenly, sending Emily's coffee sloshing dangerously close to her lap. She yelped, gripping the armrests, her eyes wide. Oh no, oh no. Why does anyone do this for fun? Jonathan glanced up from his tablet, his voice even, statistically, you're safer here than in a car. If you finish that sentence with more likely to die in a car accident, I swear I will pour this coffee directly into your lap. For a beat. His eyes softened, a flicker of something almost like amusement. Noted. The plane jolted again, and Emily squeezed her eyes shut, muttering under her breath. Her knuckles were white against the armrest. Jonathan hesitated, then awkwardly, almost reluctantly placed his hand over hers. The warmth startled her. She opened one eye, glancing sideways. Are you comforting me, Jonathan Pierce, the man who schedules meetings tighter than rush hour traffic? His jaw tightened slightly. It seemed appropriate. Emily stared at him for a long moment, then let out a shaky laugh. Well, it's working. Sort of. Mostly because I'm so distracted wondering if this is a sign of the apocalypse. Jonathan didn't move his hand. He didn't say anything more, but in that small, steady gesture, something shifted. the turbulence eased. Emily exhaled slowly, releasing the armrest but not pulling her hand away immediately. She leaned back in her seat, heart still racing, though not entirely from the plane's movement. Jonathan returned his gaze to his tablet, as if nothing had happened. But his chest felt tighter than it had in years, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure if discipline alone could steady him. The black sedan slid to a smooth stop in front of the Glass Tower Hotel, its mirrored walls stretching so high into the Seattle sky that Emily craned her neck until it hurt. The building gleamed like a shard of ice, reflecting the shifting clouds above. Bellhops in crisp uniforms rushed forward to open doors, their movements so synchronized it felt like choreography. Jonathan stepped out first, buttoning his jacket with the same calm precision he carried everywhere. To him, this was routine. To Emily, it was another universe. She climbed out slowly, clutching her carry-on as if someone might snatch it from her hands. Her mouth fell open as her eyes swept the lobby, visible through the glass door's towering ceilings. A chandelier that glittered like a small galaxy, polished marble floors that seemed too pristine for ordinary footsteps. "This isn't a hotel," Emily whispered under her breath. This is a Bond villain's lair. If the villain hired the best interior designer in the Pacific Northwest." Jonathan handed his credit card to the concierge without missing a beat. "It's functional?" Emily snapped her gaze toward him. "Functional, Jonathan. My entire apartment could fit inside that chandelier." He gave the faintest smirk. "Exaggeration doesn't suit you." Her cheeks flushed, and she turned away, letting her eyes travel back up the staircase that spiraled like a sculpture. Every detail screamed wealth velvet seating and jewel tones, staff who moved like ghosts, fresh flowers arranged in artful bursts. The elevator ride to their floor was silent, except for the quiet hum of machinery. When the doors opened, Emily nearly stumbled into her suite. She froze just inside the doorway. The room stretched wider than her mother's entire house back in upstate New York. A king-sized bed sat like a throne draped in white linen. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering sprawl of Seattle, the Space Needle rising proudly in the distance. A sitting area boasted velvet chairs and a mahogany desk. The bathroom door stood ajar, and through it, she caught a glimpse of a tub the size of a small swimming pool, set against glass that looked straight out at the skyline. She exhaled slowly, dropping her bag onto the carpet. "Okay," she muttered to herself. Try not to look like a kid who just wandered into the candy store, but she couldn't help it. She wandered the suite, fingertips grazing the smooth surfaces, testing the bounce of the mattress with one hand, even opening the minibar just to stare at the neat rows of sparkling water and champagne. The knock on her door made her jump. She opened it to find Jonathan standing there, as composed as ever. His tie was still perfectly in place, not a single hair out of order. "Well?" he asked, glancing past her into the suite. Emily crossed her arms, trying to mask her awe with humor. "It's fine, I guess. You know, if you're into panoramic views and bathtubs the size of a Volkswagen, you'll need rest," Jonathan said simply. "Dinner in my suite at 7. We'll prepare for tomorrow's meeting." She opened her mouth to reply, but then his eyes flicked to the scuffed corner of her carry-on bag. Without thinking, he said, "You might consider investing in new luggage. That one looks tired." The words landed like a stone in her stomach. Emily's smile faltered. She glanced down at the faded fabric, the worn handle, the scratches from years of bus rides and cheap flights. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers practical, dependable, bought with her own money after months of saving. For a beat too long, silence stretched between them. Jonathan realized too late that his comment hadn't been received as he intended. He had meant it casually, a simple observation, but the look on her face, tight, wounded, defensive, told him he had struck deeper than he should have. She forced a laugh, brittle around the edges. "Well, Jonathan, not all of us have a staff of tailors and a private jet to keep our belongings looking pristine. Some of us make do." And before he could respond, she closed the door gently but firmly. Jonathan stood there in the hall, jaw clenched, an unfamiliar discomfort rising in his chest. He replayed the moment in his head, realizing how casually the words had left his mouth, how blind he had been to what they might mean. For years, he had mastered the art of silence, of cold efficiency. Apologies were not in his vocabulary. Mistakes were corrected with action, not words. Yet now, staring at the closed door, he felt something foreign regret. He didn't know how to fix it. Inside, Emily sat on the edge of the massive bed, staring at her scuffed bag. Her throat felt tight, though she told herself it was silly to care. He hadn't meant anything cruel. Jonathan Pierce didn't deal in cruelty, only in blunt, surgical truth. But still, the sting lingered. For the first time, she wondered if this trip might unravel more than just her carefully managed distance. At precisely 7 o'clock, Emily knocked on the door of Jonathan's suite. She told herself she wasn't nervous, that it was just another work night, never mind the fact that her palms were sweating, or that she had changed tops 3 times before finally deciding no shirt in her suitcase was worthy of a penthouse dinner. Jonathan opened the door immediately, as if he had been waiting. His jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled neatly to the forearms. The sight startled her more than it should have. Jonathan Pierce, the untouchable CEO, looked almost human. The suite was nearly identical to hers, only more ordered. His briefcase sat open on the desk, files stacked with military precision. On the dining table lay 2 place settings, each with silver cutlery glinting under warm light. A bottle of red wine breathed quietly in its decanter. Room service had arrived early, filling the air with the scent of seared salmon and roasted vegetables. Emily stepped inside, balancing her laptop under one arm. "So, this is dinner," she said, her tone light. "Romance by PowerPoint efficiency," Jonathan corrected, pouring her a glass of wine. "We avoid the crowd downstairs. And we work." She set her bag on the chair, shaking her head. "One day, Jonathan, you're going to learn the difference between efficient and soul-crushing. But tonight, fine. Let's get to it." They ate as they worked, laptops open between plates. Emily demolished a basket of bread with zero hesitation, scribbling notes in between bites. Jonathan watched her quietly, bemused by the way she could switch from analyzing quarterly projections to critiquing the butter ratio on her roll without pause. At one point, she clicked through his presentation slides, her expression shifting from focus to horror. "Jonathan, is this Comic Sans?" He looked up, startled. "What?" She jabbed at the screen. "Slide 4. This font, it's Comic Sans." Jonathan frowned, leaning over to see for himself. His jaw tightened. "Unacceptable." Emily burst out laughing, nearly dropping her fork. "Unacceptable, Jonathan. This is a crime against humanity. You can't stand in front of millionaires tomorrow and present in Comic Sans. They'll laugh you out of the room." His brow furrowed, though his eyes betrayed the faintest flicker of embarrassment. It must have been a formatting error. "Formatting error or not," she said between giggles, "you, sir, are on the verge of becoming a meme." He gave her a long, assessing look, and then, unexpectedly, impossibly, he laughed. It wasn't sharp or calculated. It wasn't the polite chuckle he used to soften a tense boardroom. It was real, unguarded, low in his chest. Emily froze, staring at him as if she had just spotted a rare animal in the wild. "There it is," she whispered, "proof you actually know how to laugh." He shook his head, still smiling faintly. "Don't make it sound like a discovery of the century." "It is," she insisted. "I've worked for you 4 years. Do you know how many times I've seen you genuinely laugh? 0. Until tonight. I should record this for evidence." "Don't you dare," he said, his voice dipping into mock sternness. For a moment, silence settled, but not the cold kind that usually hung between them. This silence was softer, filled with the clink of cutlery and the hum of the city outside the windows. Emily sipped her wine, feeling strangely lighter. She stole a glance at him. Without the armor of his jacket and tie, Jonathan looked different. His features, usually so sharp, seemed less intimidating. There was something in the way he leaned back in his chair, something in the way his gaze lingered on her, not calculating, not critical, but almost thoughtful. Her heart stuttered. She quickly looked back at her laptop. All right, let's fix this disaster of a slide deck before you embarrass yourself tomorrow. Jonathan didn't argue. He watched her fingers fly across the keyboard, editing slides, reorganizing points, cutting fluff with ruthless efficiency. She was good better than good. He realized, not for the first time, how much of his empire leaned quietly on her shoulders. And yet, beneath the professionalism, something else hovered, a question he wasn't ready to ask. Hours slipped by, unnoticed. When Emily finally closed her laptop, the clock neared midnight. Her eyes were heavy, but she smiled, satisfied with their progress. "Big day tomorrow," she said, rising from her chair. Jonathan stood too, walking her to the door. He didn't know why he never did such things, but tonight it felt necessary. "Get some rest." "Emily," he said quietly. She glanced up at him, caught off guard by the gentleness in his tone. For a fleeting second, the air between them shifted something unspoken, fragile, almost dangerous. Then she nodded, stepping into the hallway. "Good night, Jonathan." When the door closed behind her, Jonathan exhaled slowly. He had laughed tonight, truly laughed for the first time in years. And it was because of her. The realization unsettled him. It also, inexplicably, made him feel alive. Emily rarely woke up early on business trips. Normally, she preferred the comfort of hitting the snooze button twice and stumbling toward the coffee pot before attempting human conversation. But that morning in Seattle, sleep had abandoned her. The time difference, the nerves about the Harrington meeting, and maybe the echo of Jonathan's laughter the night before kept her restless. At dawn, she slipped out of bed and pulled the heavy curtains aside. The city stretched beneath her, washed in golden light. The Glass Tower Hotel's infinity pool shimmered like a sheet of liquid silver high above the streets. It looked impossibly calm, the water smooth as glass, the skyline rising all around. Emily chewed her lip. She hadn't planned on swimming. She hadn't even thought about packing a swimsuit until Jonathan's offhand remark about her oversized sweaters. But, at the last minute, she had tossed her old navy one-piece into her suitcase. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers sturdy, comfortable, unpretentious. 10 minutes later, she padded barefoot across the cool tile deck, a towel draped over her arm. The pool was nearly deserted, save for a couple quietly reading in the far corner. Emily set her glasses and towel on a lounge chair, took a breath, and stepped into the water. It wrapped around her like silk, cool enough to make her gasp, warm enough to settle her nerves. She swam slowly at first, letting her body stretch, her hair loosening from its tie until it fanned around her like dark ribbons. Each lap eased the tension she carried, the steady rhythm soothing in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she finally surfaced, sunlight caught the droplets on her skin, turning them into sparks. She tilted her head back, smoothing her wet hair away from her face. Without glasses, without makeup, without the armor of pencil skirts and tidy buns, she looked different, lighter, unburdened. She didn't notice him at first. Jonathan had returned from his morning run, earbuds still dangling around his neck, a towel slung across his shoulders. He was heading toward the elevators when movement by the pool caught his eye. He stopped. For a moment, he thought it was just another guest, but then she turned toward the light and the breath caught in his chest. Emily. He had seen her in countless states of chaos, glasses slipping, arms full of folders, ink smudged on her hand, hair rebelliously escaping its bun. He had seen her in the office light, sharp and efficient, hiding behind quick wit and sarcasm, but he had never seen her like this. The morning sun lit her in a way that stole his composure. Her expression was unguarded, peaceful. There was no banter, no teasing, no shield, just Emily, fully herself. Something shifted in him, sudden and terrifying. For the first time in years, his carefully built walls cracked. His heart stumbled in his chest, betraying the discipline he clung to. Jonathan was a man who controlled markets, who never entered a meeting unprepared, who measured every word before speaking. But as he stood frozen by the pool, watching her laugh softly to herself as she floated on her back, he realized he had no control over this. Emily noticed him then. She blinked, startled, before smirking as she reached for the pool steps. Well, Jonathan Pierce, out in the wild. I didn't think you existed outside of a suit. He stepped closer, tugging the earbuds from his ears. His voice was quieter than usual. I could say the same about you. His hand moved faintly, gesturing to her bare face, her undone hair, the version of her he had never seen. Emily wrapped her towel around herself, raising an eyebrow. Careful, Jonathan. That almost sounded like a compliment. His throat felt dry. He forced the words out anyway. Maybe it was. For a beat. Silence stretched between them, charged, unfamiliar, fragile. Jonathan felt his pulse thrum in his temples. He was losing ground, losing control, and the realization rattled him more than any boardroom ambush ever had. Emily tilted her head, studying him. You okay? You look like you just saw quarterly profits triple. His lips pressed into a line. Something like that. She smirked, brushing past him toward the elevators, towel clutched tightly around her shoulders. Guess you'll just have to imagine what fun looks like. Jonathan's gaze lingered longer than it should have, following the soft imprint of her steps across the tile. When the elevator doors slid shut behind her, he exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. Jonathan Pierce, unshakable, disciplined, immune to distraction, had just lost control, and it terrified him. The Harrington Group's boardroom sat high above downtown Seattle, a sleek rectangle of glass and chrome with a view of the bay that could make anyone forget why they were there. But no one in the room was distracted, not today. The West Bay infrastructure project was worth billions, and the Harringtons were notorious for pushing until their partners bent or broke. The air was sharp with tension, every chair occupied by someone with too much power and not enough patience. Jonathan Pierce sat at the head of the polished oak table, posture perfect, expression unreadable. His navy suit was immaculate, his tie a sharp line of control. Across from him, Victor Harrington leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, testing him like a predator circling prey. Emily Warren sat slightly behind and to the right of Jonathan, laptop open, notepad ready. She had promised herself she'd stay quiet, invisible. She wasn't here to spar with millionaires, she was here to support, to keep Jonathan on track. But 10 minutes into the meeting, it was clear Jonathan wouldn't need support. He was in his element. When Victor questioned the timeline, Jonathan countered with figures so precise the man stopped smirking. When another board member pressed for concessions, Jonathan leaned forward, voice calm but cutting, dismantling their argument piece by piece. Watching him was like watching a blade sharp, controlled, merciless. Emily scribbled notes furiously, stealing glances at him. This was the Jonathan the world knew, the man who never wavered, who could turn steel into silk and back again with a sentence. But then came the moment. One of the Harrington lawyers, a woman with a clipped accent, slid a document across the table. Clause 17, she said smoothly, will require oversight on all subcontractors. Our liability team insists. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He didn't move the paper. That's not part of the agreement. It is now, the lawyer replied. Unless, of course, you prefer to postpone this deal. The silence that followed was heavy. Emily felt the shift instantly. The clause was poison, an attempt to seize control. If Jonathan snapped back too sharply, the entire negotiation could collapse. If he yielded, he'd lose ground he'd spent months gaining. She glanced at him. His shoulders were still, his face calm, but she recognized the flicker in his eyes. He was seconds from cutting them down and maybe cutting off the deal with it. Emily's heart hammered, Before she could second-guess herself, she leaned forward slightly. "If I may," she said, her voice steady though her palms were damp. The subcontractor clause presents a logistical conflict. Oversight at that level would delay project delivery by at least 8 months. And given the Harrington Group's public commitment to a summer 2025 launch, I don't believe postponement is in your interest. All eyes turned to her. For a moment, she thought she'd made a catastrophic mistake, but she pressed on, forcing her voice to stay calm. "However," she added, "if liability is the concern, Pierce Global is willing to increase reporting transparency, weekly progress audits, shared directly with your oversight team. That ensures accountability without delaying construction." The room shifted. The lawyer frowned. Victor tapped a finger against the table. "And Jonathan?" Jonathan looked at her. It wasn't just a glance. It was steady, deliberate, his eyes holding hers for a fraction too long. Something flickered there, something almost warm. Victor cleared his throat. "Reasonable," he conceded finally. "Transparency audits may suffice." Jonathan broke his gaze, turning back to the table. "Then we're agreed. Clause 17 is off. Weekly audits, starting day 1. His voice was steel again, but Emily caught the faintest undercurrent approval. The meeting pressed on, tense but manageable. Emily kept her head down, typing notes, trying not to think about the look he had given her. It had been nothing, surely nothing, a CEO acknowledging his assistant for stepping in. That was all, and yet her chest was warm, her pulse refusing to calm. When the final documents were signed and hands shaken, the Harringtons filed out, their polished shoes clicking against the tile. Jonathan remained seated for a moment, fingers pressed lightly against the table. His mask never slipped in public, but Emily knew him well enough to see at the smallest exhale, the faintest release of tension. She closed her laptop, her voice quiet. That went well. Jonathan glanced at her again, not a flicker this time, not a glance he tried to hide. His eyes lingered, dark and unreadable, until she shifted in her chair. What she asked, her tone too sharp, her nerves betraying her. "Nothing," he said softly. "You did well." Her breath caught. Compliments from Jonathan Pierce were as rare as diamonds. She forced herself to smile, shaking her head. "Careful. 2 nice words from you in one day, and people will start thinking you're human." The corner of his mouth twitched. Then, as if remembering himself, he rose smoothly, gathering his papers. "Come, we have more work to do." Emily followed him out, her face composed, but inside her thoughts tangled. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself not to read into it. And yet, she couldn't forget the way his eyes had lingered, longer than they should have. The Harrington meeting had drained them both. Jonathan returned to the glass tower with the same composure as always, but Emily knew him well enough to see the faint tightness in his shoulders. She, on the other hand, felt restless. Hours of polite smiles and corporate posturing left her craving something real. So, when evening came, instead of retreating to her suite, Emily knocked on Jonathan's door. He opened it, already dressed in another impeccable suit, tie perfectly knotted. "We have the investor dinner in an hour." "Not yet, we don't," Emily said, hands on her hips. "I found something better. Come on." His brow arched. "Better night market," she announced, eyes bright. "Street food, music, people actually living their lives instead of, well, whatever this is." She waved vaguely at the pristine suite behind him. Jonathan didn't move. "Street food is unsanitary." Emily groaned. "Jonathan, not everything comes with a white tablecloth and a sommelier. You need to live a little." "I live enough," he said dryly. "Correction," she countered. "You exist." Big difference. For a moment, they stared at each other, her determination clashing with his indifference. Then, shockingly, he sighed and loosened his tie. Half an hour, no more. Emily grinned. Deal. The market sprawled across several city blocks, glowing with strings of lights and pulsing with music. Smoke curled from food stalls. carrying the scent of grilled skewers, fried dough, and something sweet she couldn't place. Children darted through the crowd with sticky fingers. Vendors shouted in cheerful competition, and couples strolled hand in hand. Emily's eyes lit up. "Now this," she said, inhaling deeply. "This is life." Jonathan, walking beside her in a tailored jacket that screamed wrong crowd, looked unconvinced. His gaze flicked over the cracked pavement, the mismatched tables, the open flames licking at skewers. "This is chaos." "Exactly," Emily replied, tugging him toward a stall where an elderly man fanned sizzling meat over coals. "Two, please," she said, holding up fingers. The vendor handed her 2 skewers dripping with sauce. Emily bit into one and groaned. "Oh, that's good." She held the other out to Jonathan. "Here." He didn't take it. "What is it? Does it matter?" she asked through a mouthful. "Just try it." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Emily, I don't belong here." The words slipped out sharper than he intended, but the effect was immediate. Emily froze, skewer still extended. Her smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jonathan exhaled, looking away. "I mean, this isn't my world. Crowded streets, greasy food, strangers shouting. I don't—" He stopped himself, but it was too late. "I don't fit." The sting hit harder than she expected. Emily lowered the skewer, her voice quiet. "And what does that make me? Because this," she gestured around. "At the noise and the smells and the laughter spilling from every corner, this feels a lot like my world." Jonathan's throat tightened. He hadn't meant it as an insult, but her expression cut through him. She looked small suddenly, her defenses gone. For a long moment, the noise of the market seemed to fade. Then Emily shook her head, forcing a brittle laugh. "Forget it. Go back to your 5-star dinners. Jonathan, I'll eat my skewers in peace." She turned away, biting into hers with exaggerated gusto. Jonathan stood frozen, a war raging in his chest. Pride urged him to retreat, to stick to the world he knew, but something heavier, regret, maybe pulled him forward. He took the skewer from her hand, ignoring the surprise in her eyes, and bit into it. The flavor hit immediately smoky, spicy, alive. He chewed slowly, then nodded once. "It's good?" Emily blinked, then laughed, this time genuine. "See, you didn't die?" "No," he admitted, taking another bite. "Apparently not." They moved on together, the air between them lighter, but tinged with something unspoken. Emily pointed out dumplings, shaved ice, neon-colored drinks. Jonathan refused with a shake of his head. At one stall, she bought a handmade bracelet, and before she could pay, Jonathan slipped cash into the vendor's hand. "Was that necessary?" she asked. "Yes," he said simply. Emily rolled her eyes but smiled all the same. As they walked back toward the hotel, Jonathan glanced at her, catching the way her laughter blended with the hum of the market. She belonged here, he realized, in places full of life, where nothing was polished but everything was real. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe he wanted to belong there too. The city hummed beneath them, 1,000 lights glittering against the dark Seattle sky. From the balcony of the glass tower, the streets below looked like rivers of gold, headlights weaving through the night. The sound of distant traffic blended with the faint crash of waves against the harbor. Emily leaned against the railing, arms folded, her hair tugged gently by the wind. She hadn't meant to come out here. She'd been pacing her suite, restless after the night market, her mind still tangled with Jonathan's words and his reluctant concession. Eventually, the view had drawn her outside, the cool night air soothing where her thoughts could not. The knock on the balcony door startled her. Jonathan stepped out, 2 glasses of wine in hand. His tie was gone, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked less like the immovable CEO and more like a man simply tired. "Couldn't sleep?" Emily asked, forcing lightness into her tone. "Couldn't work anymore," he admitted, offering her a glass. She took it, their fingers brushing briefly. They stood in silence for a while, sipping wine, gazing at the sprawl of the city. It was a silence unlike the ones in his office, sharp and cold. This one was soft, filled with space to breathe. Finally, Jonathan spoke. His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. When my father built Pierce Global, he told me one thing. Feelings are distractions. Focus is survival. He lived by that until the day he died. Emily turned slightly, watching him. His gaze stayed fixed on the city. I was 22 when he passed. He continued. I didn't inherit a company. I inherited a test. Everyone waited for me to fail. Every mistake I made in those early years was a headline. Every stumble felt like the end. His hand tightened slightly around the glass. So I stopped stumbling. I stopped everything. Friends, relationships, even sleep, sometimes. If it didn't serve the company, it didn't serve me. That's how I survived. Emily's chest tightened. She had known Jonathan was disciplined, ruthless even, but she hadn't imagined the cost. You make it sound like you gave up your whole life, she said softly. He glanced at her then, and in his eyes she saw something raw. I did. The honesty in his voice startled her. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then she set her glass down on the railing, folding her hands. You're not the only one who grew up without choices. He tilted his head, curious. My mom ran a little bookstore in Albany. Emily began. It wasn't much, just shelves crammed with paperbacks and the smell of old pages. She got sick when I was 12, lung problems. We didn't have money for doctors, so I worked, babysitting, waiting tables, whatever I could find. School during the day, shifts at night. Sleep was optional. Jonathan's gaze sharpened, but not critically intently, as if every word mattered. I remember studying algebra with a tray of fries balanced on my arm, Emily said with a half smile. I used to tell myself, if I just worked harder, maybe I could fix it all, pay the bills, keep her safe, make everything right. Of course, it doesn't work that way. She still passed when I was 20, and all I had left was debt and this determination to never fall apart. Because if I fell apart, who would keep it together? Her voice caught, just slightly. She looked away, embarrassed. Anyway, that's why I'm good at being your assistant. I guess I've been managing chaos my whole life. Silence stretched again, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of words they hadn't said. Jonathan set his glass down, stepping closer to the railing beside her. You're nothing like I expected when I hired you. She laughed softly, shaking her head. What did you expect? Someone polished, someone who matched your world? Yes, he said simply. Someone easy to replace. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the weight of his words. She turned to meet his gaze, surprised by the sincerity there. And now she asked, her voice low. He held her eyes for a long moment. Now, I don't want to imagine replacing you. Emily's breath hitched. She looked away quickly, back at the glittering city, her heart racing. It wasn't a confession, not exactly, but it was closer than anything she'd ever thought she'd hear from him. They stood side by side, shoulders nearly touching, both staring out at the same horizon. For the first time, the distance between their worlds felt smaller, and in the quiet of that balcony, amid the glow of city lights and the pull of old wounds, they found something unexpected, something dangerously like understanding. The days that followed moved with a strange rhythm, meetings in gleaming conference rooms, hurried lunches, long nights fine-tuning presentations. On the surface, nothing had changed. Jonathan Pierce was still the unshakable CEO, crisp and controlled. Emily Warren was still his quick-witted assistant, armed with sticky notes and sarcasm. And yet, beneath the surface, everything felt different. Emily noticed it first in the smallest moments. The way Jonathan's eyes lingered on her during meetings, just a fraction longer than necessary. The way his hand would steady her elbow as they crossed a busy street. The way his voice softened when he asked if she'd eaten breakfast, as if the question wasn't about food at all. She told herself she was imagining it, that she was reading into things because of the balcony, the market, the laughter in his suite. But the weight of his gaze was undeniable, and every time it landed on her, her chest tightened with something she couldn't name. One evening, after a long negotiation session, they returned to the hotel. Emily collapsed on the sofa in Jonathan's suite, flipping through documents. Jonathan disappeared into the other room, and when he returned, he set something small on the table in front of her. A pen. Not just any pen, a vintage Mont Blanc, polished black with silver trim. Emily frowned, picking it up carefully. "What's this, a gift?" Jonathan said simply. She arched an eyebrow. "From you. Did someone hack your personality settings?" His mouth twitched, but he didn't look away. "You've been correcting my notes with those cheap ballpoints that smear everywhere." This seemed more fitting. Emily turned the pen over in her fingers. It was smooth, heavy, elegant. It probably cost more than her rent. She swallowed, suddenly uneasy. "Jonathan, I can't—" "You can—" He interrupted. His tone was calm, but there was something underneath it, something almost vulnerable. "You've earned it." Her protest died on her tongue. She stared at the pen, her chest tight. It wasn't just a gift. It was recognition, acknowledgement, proof that he saw her as more than the assistant who managed his schedule, and that terrified her. Later, back in her own suite, Emily sat on the bed, the pen resting in her palm. The city lights glowed through the window, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered the way Jonathan had looked at her when he placed the pen in her hand, steady, almost searching. She remembered the warmth in his voice when he said she'd earned it. Her stomach twisted. This was dangerous. She had worked too hard to build her reputation, to carve out respect in a world that rarely offered it to women like her. If anyone at Pierce Global caught wind of even the suggestion of something between her and Jonathan, the whispers would spread like wildfire. She would be the assistant who slept her way into influence, the woman who blurred the lines. Emily pressed the pen against her forehead, eyes shut tight. "What are you doing?" she scolded herself. "This is your boss, your job, your entire career." And yet, she thought of the balcony, the rare honesty in his voice. She thought of the way he had eaten that street skewer just to make amends. She thought of his hand covering hers on the airplane, steadying her in turbulence. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, something she had never expected to find in the cold, calculated world of Jonathan Pierce. Her heart whispered what her mind refused to admit maybe. Just maybe. She was falling. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The hum of Pierce Global's headquarters felt different the morning they returned. Phones still rang. Keyboards still clattered. Voices still whispered, but the whispers were sharper, hungrier. Emily sensed it the moment she stepped off the elevator. Eyes flicked toward her, then away too quickly. A pair of interns at the copier exchanged a look before pretending to study their papers. Marcy from HR offered a smile that was far too knowing. Emily straightened her shoulders and marched toward her desk. "Ignore it," she told herself. "Get through the day. Head down. Business as usual." But business as usual had changed. She logged into her computer, trying to focus on the avalanche of emails. But messages from coworkers popped up on her screen one after another. "Saw you and Pierce land together. First class. Huh? New perfume. Or is that Seattle glow? Careful, office rumors travel faster than FedEx." Emily slammed her laptop shut, cheeks burning. Of course, she thought bitterly. 4 years of hard work, and one business trip erases it all. Now, I'm just gossip fodder. She pushed away from her desk, heading for the break room to breathe. At precisely 9 o'clock, Jonathan emerged from his glass office. He moved through the floor with his usual calm authority. Suit flawless, stride measured. No one could tell from his face that anything had changed. But when he stopped at Emily's desk, the office seemed to inhale as one. He set a cardboard cup on the corner. "Double shot latte," he said evenly. "Extra cinnamon." Emily blinked at the cup, then at him. "You remembered my order. I have an excellent memory for important details," he replied, his tone cool but steady. From the nearby desks, heads subtly turned, Emily could feel the heat of their stares on her back. Her stomach twisted. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Jonathan, You know this will fuel at least 3 conspiracy theories before lunch, right? Let them speculate, he said simply. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into his office. Emily stared after him, muttering under her breath. And you claim I'm the troublemaker. By noon, the gossip had tripled. In the break room, Emily caught fragments of conversations, sat together the whole flight, stayed in suites, obviously, first-name basis now. She gritted her teeth, pouring herself another cup of coffee she didn't even want. Her reflection in the metal pot looked tired, worn. She hated how easily people could reduce her to a rumor, a stereotype. But when she returned to her desk, the latte Jonathan had brought was still there, steam curling faintly from the lid. She hesitated, then picked it up, taking a sip. The warmth spread through her chest, not just from the cinnamon, but from the fact that he had remembered. He had noticed, and that realization unsettled her more than the gossip. That afternoon, Jonathan called her into his office twice in an hour, both times. The tasks could easily have been handled over email, both times. She emerged to find curious eyes tracking her every step. By the second trip, she was ready to snap. You realize, she whispered sharply as she slid a file onto his desk, that people are practically writing novels about us out there. Jonathan didn't look up from his screen. I'm aware, and you're not concerned. He glanced at her then, his gaze steady. No. The simplicity of his answer nearly unraveled her. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold on to her indignation. But inside, something else twisted, something dangerously close to gratitude. For once, she wasn't alone under the microscope. Jonathan wasn't hiding, wasn't pretending she didn't matter. He wasn't protecting his reputation at her expense. It should have embarrassed her more. And it did. But it also warmed her, in a way she wasn't ready to admit. That evening, long after the whispers had faded with the emptying office, Emily sat at her desk staring at the latte cup, now drained to the last drop. She turned it slowly in her hands, tracing the cinnamon stain on the rim. Her mind churned. Shame and pride, fear and longing, all tangled together. What am I doing? She thought. This is my boss. This is reckless, dangerous. But then she remembered the way he had set the cup down that morning, not grandly, not for show, but quietly, deliberately, as if it mattered only to her. And that thought kept her heart restless long after she left the office. The restaurant was one of those hidden gems tucked into a quiet corner of Manhattan low lighting. Warm wood. The hum of conversations kept deliberately soft. Jonathan had chosen it, of course. He always knew the places with the right mix of privacy and sophistication. Emily sat across from him, her hands folded around the base of her wine glass. She had hesitated even to come, telling herself it was just another working dinner. But there were no files on the table, no laptops between plates. Just him, watching her with an intensity that made her restless. The waiter poured wine and slipped away. Emily cleared her throat, forcing a light tone. So, what's tonight's agenda, investor gossip market projections? Not tonight, Jonathan said quietly. She froze. There was something in his voice, something stripped of its usual armor. Then, what? He leaned forward, his eyes holding hers. Emily, I'm tired of pretending. I don't want this to be just work anymore. The words hit her like a jolt, her breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying I care about you, he replied simply. More than I should. More than I ever expected to. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the clink of a glass at another table. Emily's heart raced, but her stomach sank at the same time. Jonathan, her voice wavered. You can't say that. I'm your assistant. People already talk. They'll tear me apart. They'll say I slept my way to the top. I'll be... She stopped herself, her throat tightening. I'll be nothing but a story in someone else's mouth. His expression hardened, though not at her, at the world she described. Let them talk. I'd rather face rumors than spend another day pretending I don't want this. Emily shook her head, anger sparking through her fear. "That's easy for you to say. You're Jonathan Pierce. People admire you, fear you. The worst you get is a headline you can buy your way out of. Me? I'll lose everything I've built, my respect, my dignity, my job." He leaned in further, voice low but fierce. "I'm not offering you a headline. I'm offering you honesty. Whatever this is between us, it's real. You feel it too." Her chest constricted. She did feel it. That was the problem. Emily pushed back her chair suddenly, the scrape echoing too loudly in the quiet restaurant. "I can't." Jonathan rose as well, but he didn't reach for her. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark with something between frustration and hurt. "Emily, no." She shook her head, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. "You don't understand. I can't lose myself in this. Not after everything I've worked for." The words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, Jonathan looked as though he might argue again, insist, break down every defense she tried to put up. But then he stopped. His silence was almost worse. Emily grabbed her coat, her hands trembling. She didn't look at him as she turned toward the door. Outside, the city air was sharp, cool against her flushed cheeks. She walked fast, heels striking the pavement, her heart pounding in her chest. Why did he have to say it? She thought bitterly. Why couldn't he just let things be? But beneath the anger lay something else, a truth she couldn't shake. He had said he cared, and she had believed him. Her stomach twisted. Every instinct screamed at her to protect herself, to keep her walls high. But another part, the part that remembered his laughter in the suite, his hand steadying hers on the airplane, his eyes softening on the balcony, ached at the thought of walking away. By the time she reached her apartment, Emily's hands were still trembling. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, torn in two. She had wanted boundaries, safety, control, but what she had with Jonathan was none of those things. It was dangerous, reckless, and terrifying. And yet, she couldn't deny it was real. The week after that dinner stretched longer than any Emily could remember. She buried herself in work, arriving early, leaving late, keeping her eyes glued to her computer screen. If she had to speak with Jonathan, she kept it short, professional, her tone clipped enough to make her own chest ache. She thought it would help distance, silence, discipline, but every time she passed his office, every time she caught his reflection in the glass, her pulse betrayed her. Jonathan, for his part, kept his mask on in public, to the board, to the clients. He was still the same unshakable CEO, but in private, the cracks showed. His temper flared at small mistakes. He barked at staff for delays that weren't theirs, and at night. When the office emptied, he lingered in his chair staring at the skyline, his hands gripping the arms until his knuckles whitened. For the first time in years, Jonathan Pierce felt unsteady, and he hated it. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. Pierce Global was set to finalize a massive shipping contract, one Jonathan had spent months negotiating. The client's delegation arrived, sharp suits and sharper smiles, expecting precision. But when the presentation began, disaster struck. The wrong deck had been loaded onto the screen, an early draft riddled with errors, half-finished charts, and the dreaded Comic Sans header Emily had once mocked. A murmur spread across the boardroom. The delegation shifted in their seats, unimpressed. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his composure slipping. "This is unacceptable," he muttered under his breath, his eyes dark. Emily, seated at the edge of the room, felt the chill sweep through her. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing her laptop, she stood, voice steady despite the adrenaline surging in her veins. "If you'll give us just a moment," she said smoothly, "I'll bring up the updated file. The version you're seeing is a draft and early draft. The finalized deck is far more comprehensive." She moved quickly, plugging in, typing furiously. Within seconds, the corrected slides filled the screen, clean, sharp, persuasive. She clicked through with calm narration, covering the transition as if it had been planned all along. By the end, The delegation nodded in approval. One even leaned back, murmuring, "Much better." Jonathan exhaled slowly, the storm in his chest quieting. The contract was saved. The meeting ended in handshakes and signatures, but the relief didn't feel like victory. When the room emptied, Emily gathered her things, ready to retreat to her desk. Jonathan stopped her with a single word. "Emily." She froze, her heart thudding, slowly. She turned back. His expression was unreadable at first, but his eyes betrayed him, haunted, unsettled. He looked at her as though she were the only thing holding the floor steady beneath him. "You saved me," he said quietly. "Not the company, not the deal. Me." Emily's throat tightened. "It's my job." He shook his head. "No, it's more than that." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, charged, filled with all the things they weren't saying. Finally, Emily looked away. "Jonathan, we can't keep doing this. Whatever this is, it's tearing both of us apart." His jaw clenched. For a man who had built an empire on control, he looked frighteningly close to unraveling. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted, the words rough, almost foreign on his tongue. Her chest ached. She wanted to step closer, to close the distance. But the office lights above them, the glass walls, the endless eyes of coworkers, they were all reminders, boundaries, consequences. So she shook her head, clutching her laptop like a shield. "Then you'll have to learn." And with that, she walked out. That night, long after the office had emptied, Jonathan remained at his desk. The skyline glowed beyond the glass. But he didn't see it. He sat with his head in his hands, shoulders hunched, the image of Emily walking away replaying in his mind until it hollowed him out. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Pierce wasn't afraid of losing a deal. He was afraid of losing her, and that fear left him more powerless than any failure ever had. The restaurant Jonathan chose was nothing like the gleaming towers or Michelin-starred rooms he usually inhabited. It was tucked on a quiet street corner in Brooklyn, the kind of place where the owner knew every customer by name. The tables were small, the candles simple, the scent of garlic and fresh bread filling the air. Emily hesitated at the door, fingers tightening on her coat. She had almost said no to his invitation, almost ignored the message he'd sent dinner. No business, please. But here she was. Jonathan stood when she entered, his suit replaced by a plain shirt and jacket. It startled her more than the candlelight did. He looked less like a CEO, more like a man stripped of his armor. They ordered quickly pasta for her, grilled fish for him, and for a while. They sat in silence, the low murmur of other diners wrapping around them. Finally, Jonathan set down his glass, his gaze steady. "Emily, I need to say this plainly. Power, reputation, contracts, none of it matters to me the way you do." Her heart lurched. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He had said it so calmly, as if it were a fact rather than a confession. "Jonathan." Her voice was low, wary. "You can't just say things like that. Do you realize what it means? For me?" "Yes," he said. "I do. And I've spent weeks trying to bury it, to tell myself it was a distraction. But it isn't. It's the first thing in years that feels real." Emily looked down at her hands, twisting the napkin in her lap. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to lean into the warmth his words stirred in her chest. But fear coiled tighter. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If I say yes, I lose everything I've worked to protect. My independence, my peace. I'll become the story everyone whispers about in the hallways." Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "Then let them whisper. I'd rather face their gossip than live one more day pretending you don't matter to me." Her throat tightened. It wasn't just the words, it was the way his voice caught slightly at the edges, the way his hands, usually so precise, rested open on the table as though he was offering them to her. Vulnerable. Bare. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, her mind a storm. She thought of her mother's bookstore, of late night scrubbing dishes in diners just to keep the lights on. She thought of how hard she had fought to build her own stability, to carve out a place where she belonged without depending on anyone. Was she really ready to risk it for him when she opened her eyes? Jonathan was still watching her, not pushing, just waiting. She took a slow breath. If I agree to this, it can't be on your terms, not contracts, not conditions, not something that can be written in a deal. He frowned slightly, uncertain. What do you mean? Her voice steadied. No contracts, no clauses, no hidden conditions. If we do this, it's not about power or convenience. It has to be the truth. Raw, messy, human truth. That's the only deal I'll sign. For a moment, silence blanketed the table. Then, slowly, Jonathan's lips curved into something rare, a genuine smile, faint but real. Truth, he repeated. I can live with that. Emily let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Then maybe, I'll give this a try. His hand closed around hers, warm and steady. For once, there was no negotiation, no strategy, just two people, tired of fighting themselves, ready to risk the unknown. In that quiet little restaurant, with candlelight flickering between them, Jonathan Pierce and Emily Warren struck the most dangerous deal of their lives. And for both of them. It was the only one that ever truly mattered. The next morning dawned gray and soft, the kind of morning where the city seemed to move slower, as if reluctant to wake. Emily walked beside Jonathan down a quiet Brooklyn street, their coats pulled tight against the chill. There was no chauffeur, no sleek black car waiting at the curb. Jonathan had insisted on walking, and for once, he looked almost comfortable out of place. His pace was slower, his expression lighter. They stopped at a small corner cafe, the kind with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs. The smell of fresh bread and strong coffee poured into the street as Emily pushed open the door. Inside, sunlight filtered through fogged windows, catching dust motes in the air. Jonathan held the door for her, a gesture so ordinary it almost startled her. She smiled faintly, sliding into a booth by the window. He joined her, resting his hands on the worn wooden table. For a while, they didn't speak. Emily sipped her coffee, watching pedestrians hurry past outside. Jonathan stirred his tea absent-mindedly, his usually sharp eyes softened by something unnameable. Finally, she set her cup down. Feels strange, doesn't it? What has he asked? This... She gestured around the hum of the espresso machine. The student bent over her notebook, the couple laughing over pancakes, no boardrooms, no glass walls, just normal. Jonathan followed her gaze. He exhaled, almost a laugh. I don't remember the last time I sat in a place like this. Emily tilted her head, studying him. Do you regret it? He shook his head. No. I regret how long it took me to get here. The words landed heavier than she expected. She reached across the table, almost without thinking, her fingers brushing his. He looked down at the contact, then up at her, his expression unreadable for a beat, and then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his hand and laced his fingers with hers. Emily's breath caught. It was such a simple thing, two hands meeting across a scratched wooden table, but it felt larger than any contract, more binding than any deal. They sat like that for a long while, neither pulling away. Later, as they stepped back into the brisk morning, Jonathan walked close enough that their shoulders brushed. The city bustled around them, indifferent, yet Emily felt cocooned in something quieter, more fragile. Emily, he said suddenly, his voice low, I built my life on contracts, everything measured, everything written down, nothing left uncertain. But this, with you. She looked up at him, waiting. This is the first thing I want without terms. No clauses, no signatures, just trust. Her throat tightened. She squeezed his hand gently. Then, trust it is. for once. Jonathan didn't reply with a sharp retort or a strategic pause. He simply nodded, as if the agreement was sealed in that moment. As the day stretched ahead, they walked on two people who had spent years hiding behind armor, now daring to lower it, piece by piece. And perhaps that was the truth all along. Even the most powerful men need someone to remind them they are human, not for what they build. Not for what they own, but for who they are when the suits come off, when the contracts end, when the world finally falls quiet. Love, real love, is not written in ink. It is not bound by signatures or sealed by clauses. It lives in small moments, shared coffee, quiet laughter, the warmth of a hand in yours. And for Jonathan Pierce and Emily Warren, that was enough. At its heart, Jonathan and Emily's story is not simply about romance. It is about what it means to remain human in a world that often values power, appearances, and control above all else. Jonathan had everything society praises: wealth, influence, prestige, yet he was empty, carrying the weight of expectations and the loneliness of never being truly seen. Emily, on the other hand, knew struggle, sacrifice, and the quiet dignity of resilience. She reminded him, and perhaps all of us, that no title or fortune can replace the need for genuine connection. The lesson is clear: even the strongest among us, even those who seem untouchable, long for someone who sees beyond the mask. And for those of us who have spent a lifetime working, giving, or hiding parts of ourselves, it is never too late to let another soul in. Love, trust, and understanding are not luxuries. They are the foundation of a life worth living. And in the end, it is not contracts or accomplishments that define us, but the courage to reach across the table, take someone's hand and say, "This is real. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and joining the journey of Jonathan and Emily." If their story touched your heart, reminded you of life's deeper truths, or simply kept you company today, we would be truly grateful if you could support our channel. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends and loved ones, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story we bring to life. Your support means more than words can say. Until next time, stay inspired, stay hopeful, and remember, every story has the power to shine.